Warhammer 40,000's well-established canon outline the events which sees the Emperor interned upon his golden throne. We all know the story. Sanguinius confronts Horus aboard the Vengeful Spirit and is slain moments before the Emperor arrives. The Emperor then obliterates Horus's soul, seeing that his most wayward son was beyond redemption. However, with the end of the Siege of Terra in sight, I've begun to notice bits and pieces of the lore which have sowed the seeds of doubt that this version of events is the true version of events, and the version that we are going to see when that series finishes. I'm going to be bold and suggest that it is likely that we're going to see Horus slaying the Emperor, Sanguinius slaying Horus, and Valdor slaying Sanguinius in a truly tragic Shakespearean ending. Now, I will address each of those points in turn, but first let me caution you that this video will contain significant spoilers for the following Black Library novels: Saturnine, Godblight, The Fury of Magnus, Konrad Curze, and Darkness in the Blood. Whilst I would obviously prefer it if you listen to the entirety of this video, I would hate to spoil any lore revelations in a book you have yet to read. So beginning with my initial claim that Horus kills the Emperor, my first suspicion that we are due for a radical shake-up in the established canon begins with the characterization of Ollianus Pius. In the established lore, Pius is the guardsman who sacrificed himself to save the Emperor from a killing blow from Horus. However, throughout Saturnine, Pius, going by his common name Trooper Person, is characterized as a complete and utter liar who spins tall tales of battlefield heroics in order to inspire the masses towards faith in the Emperor and victory on the battlefield. This characterization of Pius in Saturnine seems completely at odds with how he has been previously presented in the other Horus Heresy books and in Mortis. In these books, he is a perpetual that travels through time, speaking of a duty, a need to be at a specific point in time to do a great deed. I find the incongruity of this character in Saturnine to be too much on the nose to lack any significance. And perhaps it's this version of Pius who sets the scene for the origin of the heroic myth. He retells the order of events because the reality was so barbaric and messy that it would not inspire faith in the Emperor and leave the Imperium largely undefended in his absence. With this in mind, the first line written in the Horus Heresy, "I was there the day Horus slew the Emperor," takes on a more prophetic meaning. Especially when you consider that Konrad Curze, when in commune with an aspect of the Emperor in his own Primarch book, laughs at the Emperor saying, and I quote, "Did you choose to let Horus gut you?" As Curze's Primarch book is set a couple of hundred years after the end of the Horus Heresy, this is insight he only would have had through his prophetic visions as he was stuck in stasis. While it is known that Horus caused immense damage to the Emperor, I can't seem to find any evidence of the Emperor being gutted by Horus. Whilst this presumes that Curze isn't taking poetic license with the truth, it does raise a question which also corresponds well with the current lore. Why did the Emperor allow himself to be maimed by Horus? In the currently accepted version of events, the Emperor only kills Horus after Horus fails to accept salvation. Now, the idea that the Emperor is willing to forgive any Primarch is acceptable, see for example Godblight, The Fury of Magnus, or Curze's book, but the idea that he would allow himself to be maimed because he couldn't bear hurting his fallen son seems kind of like a fanciful narrative which would inspire the common folk to believe in the Emperor's benevolence. From the Alpharius book, we know that Horus was not the first found. And from Master of Mankind, we know that the Emperor sees his Primarchs as tools necessary to achieve his ends. As such, it may be that the Emperor was planning on being killed by Horus in order to enter the next phase of the great game between the gods. A strong piece of evidence for this emerges from Curze's Primarch book, as the Emperor tells Curze, and I quote, "Nothing ever dies. Death is a state of transition." Where the Emperor's plan may have gone awry is that after suffering his mortal wound at the hand of Horus, His corpse was interned on the Golden Throne, which prevented his regeneration as a perpetual. He becomes a literal corpse god on the Golden Throne. We know perpetuals take some time to regenerate. In Fury of Magnus, Olivia took some time after being killed at the hands of Magnus, and Malcador needed to use Olivia's soul in order to regenerate himself. Either way, I find it likely that we're going to see a version of events whereby the Emperor and Horus engage in a one-on-one duel. The Emperor is wounded, and then Sanguinius comes into the fray. This leads me on to my next claim that Sanguinius is the one to kill Horus. In the current lore, we have been led to believe that it was the death of Sanguinius which causes the Black Rage within the Blood Angels. However, could it be possible that upon seeing the Emperor receive a mortal wound, Sanguinius himself was overcome with the Black Rage, which triggered a cascade of rage within his sons? We know from the Siege of Terra books that Sanguinius is aware of the premonitions of his own death, but he doesn't reveal to us how he's going to die. We also know that Sanguinius is concerned about his gene flaw, the Red Thirst, and also the depths of rage that can be reached. Could it be that Sanguinius saw himself die in the state of Black Rage? Or, in his Black Rage, does he exist as some kind of murderous tyrant? Either way, in Saturnine, Sanguinius somehow enters Angron's mind, and is assailed by the demon Primarch's rage. Whilst this shocks Sanguinius at the depths of power that rage can provide, he also gets to feel the peace that Angron feels when the demon Primarch is obliterated by bombardment, albeit temporarily before regenerating. This event may have provided Sanguinius with the resolve to enter the Black Rage state in order to destroy Horus, so long that someone could release him from that pain after the deed is done. Now this raises the question, how could Sanguinius separate Horus's soul from his body? And I suspect that one of Sanguinius's weapons has some kind of hidden power which will reveal itself during the fight. While his sword, the Blade in Carmine, is a worthy contender, I suspect that the Spira Telesto will be the culprit. Reasons for this is that the Spira Telesto would serve as an analogue for Russ's Spear of the Emperor, which caused damage to the demon's soul within Horus in the book Wolfsbane. That being said, I'm unsure whether the Spira Telesto would obliterate Horus's demon soul or remove Horus's Primarch soul from his body, thus destroying the parasitic attachment between the demon's soul and the physical realm. With Horus dead, Sanguinius would need to be killed in order for the heroic myth to have any basis in the established version of events. This brings me to my third point. I believe it will be Constantine Valdor who grants Sanguinius the Emperor's mercy. Given how recent lore has centralised Valdor, I find it hard to believe that he would be left out of the Emperor's assault on Horus's flagship, presuming the fight even takes place upon the Vengeful Spirit. Of all the central characters, Valdor is perhaps the only one who would kill a loyalist Primarch without a second thought, next to Russ. And it also does not make for a heroic myth if the Emperor's chief custodian killed the son who avenged the Emperor. It works as a more inspiring narrative to have the angel be killed by the devil and omit the man who swung the executioner's axe, or perhaps the Emperor's sword in this case. While I expect there to be a fight between Sanguinius and Valdor, I also feel that Sanguinius will be able to wrestle control over the Black Rage and ask for the Emperor's mercy. My reasoning for this comes from the book Darkness in the Blood, where Mephiston sees a black angel fighting a golden angel in the warp, before absorbing that black angel in order to have some yet unknown influence over the Black Rage in the 41st millennium. Granted, claiming that Valdor kills Sanguinius is incredibly speculative, but it does work to provide Valdor with some degree of power level, and perhaps even outline some of the motives for his current actions in the recent lore, something which demands its own video in the near future. And with that, we have our tragic Shakespearean ending, a mass of bodies on the stage in a final scene of violent fury. Personally, I would welcome such a radical reimagining of the canon, not because it suddenly changed events in order to suit Games Workshop's corporate goals going forward, but because these changes have been subtly seeded into the more recent books published by Black Library. And I suspect the ending of the Siege of Terra will help further illuminate the forward path of the lore as we move into the next chapter of Warhammer 40k. I have been Invictor Lawstrom, thank you for listening.